Let's talk about Chapter 11's discussion of theories of gender development. We're asking, how do we come to be male and female psychologically? How do we choose certain kinds of behaviors and reject others, toys, books, and where does that come from? So Freud talked about this in terms of the Oedipal stage, and he said that at 3 or 4, the little boy falls in love with his mom. At about age 5 or 6, he recognizes that there are differences between little boys and little girls, and that little girls don't have a penis. And so he rejects his love for mom and falls in love with dad, identifies with dad. Well, the good thing is that clearly uh, little boys, little girls fall in love with people in their lives. This is a text that my daughter got when she was working as a big sister. Betty's mom said every time Betty sees an engagement ring, she'll mention the kind of engagement ring she's going to get you. I've tried to explain, but she's too young. The problem is that children are gender typed well before they know that there's a difference between boys and girls, about 18 months. And even if there isn't an opposite sexed parent in the home, they still have a good sense of what it means to be male or female. There is identification, as you saw, in the text from Betty's mom. However, it seems to be with an adult who's familiar, powerful, and warm. Okay, so let's see what other options there are. Another option is a social cognitive theory. And we've talked some about Albert Bandura before. We talked about self-efficacy. I think I can, I think I can. And what he says, what Bandura says, is that we learn our gender typical behavior through behavior that predicts rewards or punishments, either through operant conditioning. So when we actually get a reward or punishment for our behavior, or through observational learning, when we watch somebody else behave in a sex typical, gender typical, or gender atypical way, and they are either receive a reward or punishment for doing so. Now, we're getting rewards and punishments all the time. Sometimes, we're getting things like this mouse saying to Bakita, "You stupid pig." Chicks don't like that. Chicks like guys who are confident, okay? Which would be observational learning. But, so what I want you to be thinking about are the range of things that influence our behavior. And that introduce gender, our action on gender. Now, those of you who've taken other psychology courses, you know that when we're talking nature, nurture, we often come together and say, well, it's both, that both contribute to whatever is going on. And probably, there are things like hormones and, masculinization of the brain or feminization of the brain that are going on. Part of what we're thinking also, though, is how does environment contribute? So Margaret Mead and others have suggested that we learn without being taught. Margaret Mead was an anthropologist, and so some of you have probably heard about her in other courses. She did some pretty famous work in New Guinea, where she was looking at gender across some of the tribes in New Guinea, isolated from outside influences. Some have what, from our perspective, are gender typical gender roles. Others are reversed, so that males were more caregiving and females were more aggressive, and still other tribes were sort of undifferentiated. What what many of us believe is that gender is sort of a non-conscious ideology. It's like we're trained in how to think about ourselves without ever having to think about it. That's non-conscious. And, you know, as we're watching TV, as we're watching a movie, as we're reading comic books, as we're reading Cosmo, we are being socialized to think about what it means to be male or female. Some people have talked about the role of school as a gender school. That is that in a school where there are both males and females, that the boys tend to become more masculine, more active, and the females tend to become more feminine, less active. So basically, think about, you know, as you're walking down the street and you're looking at people, you're making decisions about what does it mean to be male or female all throughout your day. Now think about toy commercials. Presentation of gender is very different in boy only, or in commercials that only show boys and commercials that only show girls. So commercials that only show girls are much more likely to show dolls and animals and make-believe, where commercials that show only boys are much more likely to show action figures, toys that look or that create transportation, sports, or games. And how does this real difference in terms of how gender is presented, how does that influence what we see as right, as appropriate for male or female? As you're watching Disney films, how does that tell you about what it means to be female or male? Obviously, this meme only talks about female. But, you know, if you're watching Beauty and the Beast, you conclude appearances don't matter. What counts is in your heart, unless you're the girl. Cinderella, if you're beautiful enough, you may be able to escape your terrible living conditions by getting a wealthy man to fall for you. Ariel, it's okay to abandon your family, drastically change your body, and give up your strongest talent in order to get your man. Once he sees your pretty face, only a witch's spell could draw his eyes away from you. Obviously, these are overdrawn, and yet, how many of us grew up believing some of the messages of the books that we read or the movies that we watched? And think about the number of times that you watched some of these movies. You know, you may have done so dozens of times, if you're at all like my children who did so. Excuse me, this is an ad from J. Crew, which was very controversial when it first came out. You know, J. Crew's creative director is shown with her son, you know, with her painting his toes neon pink. And some people thought it was very wonderful. And other people were very concerned about what was going to happen to this little boy. So I think the evidence suggests that there is some pretty good support for for Bandura's approach to thinking about gender, but it doesn't seem to be sufficient. So in addition to operant conditioning and observational learning, we also emphasize, the cognitive developmental or cognitive or the gender development kinds of gender schema theories look at developmental changes in the way that the child looks at the world, sort of like Piaget, and that there is some active participation in the gender typing process, creating some sort of meaning. That the child is not a passive being. So, for example, if we go back to this ad for Beckett, Beckett is having a good time. He's enjoying his time with his mom. And he may or may not believe that that this is going to change how he's, whether he's a boy or a girl and whether he is doing things right. From the cognitive developmental or gender schema theories, across time, the child begins to identify as either a male or female, often about 18 months. And so by that time, you're getting to see children have very strong preferences for for the toys that they play with. My daughter at about that age refused to wear anything but a dress, and actually only some dresses. They often organize the world in terms of gender and other things, often inaccurately. So, same daughter, I asked her, before teaching this class one year, what's the difference between boys and girls? And she said, boys have short hair, girls have long hair. Boys, let's see, girls drink milk and boys wear overalls. Now, I had very short hair at that point. And so somehow she was trying to make some sense of that. And, what is a boy or a girl? At that point, she was 3. When she was 5 or 6, she asked to get her hair cut very short. And she asked, will I still be a girl? She wasn't particularly concerned either way. It wasn't that she wanted to be a boy. It was, am I still going to be a girl? So we're clearly rewarded for gender appropriate and behavior and punished for gender inappropriate behavior. Sometimes, more so in some families or in some friend groups. Some families and friend groups are pretty open and some very much not so. Think about the role of gender. It's the first thing that we think about when we find out that somebody is having a child. Is it a boy or a girl? When someone walks down the street and is sort of gender ambiguous, often we look and we try and figure out boy or girl. Right? So our schema are initially simple and unstable. We're trying to figure out the differences between boys and girls, and have a difficult time at age 5. But by age 7, I asked my other daughter what the difference between boys and girls was, and she sort of rolled her eyes and said, girls have vaginas and boys have penises. That's what happens when you have a psychologist for a parent. Those schemas become much more sophisticated with age, even into adulthood. And so, if you walk into a grade school classroom You're going to see a lot of gendered colors. If you walk into a college classroom, people are wearing gray, black, and blue, and very few other kinds of colors. There's sort of splashes of other colors. People are beginning to think about themselves as being able to do a variety of things beyond the traditional gendered careers. By grade school, so my daughter at age 5 did not have gender constancy. She thought that she could go from a girl to a boy as her hair was cut. By grade school, they're pretty clear that that they're going to continue to stay a girl or a boy, or something else. And that picture, that schema, that concept continues to get more sophisticated across time. Okay, take care. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.